And by my colleague, Mr. Rathgeber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I join in with my colleagues indicating what a great pleasure it is to meet you both, having read a significant amount of your judgments and published papers in the last couple of months. It's certainly an honor to meet you both in person, and congratulations on being nominated for this esteemed position. And a very simple question for you, my lord. During Madam Justice's opening comment, she spoke partially in French, and I noticed you had an earpiece in your ear. Did you have any difficulty understanding or following the flow of her opening statement?
I'm looking at the translators. It was very clear. So I commend the translators because I thought they were doing a marvelous job.
Right, and I agree. And you were no doubt aware that the Supreme Court of Canada offers the high caliber quality of simultaneous translation that we enjoy here at the House of Commons. You know
yes,
that.
Yes, sir, I am.
Thank you. I want to change directions. I want to talk a little bit to both of you about the phenomenon of television cameras in the courtrooms. And Madam Justice, you talked about open courtrooms and that being part of the whole issue of accountability. And in the United States, we've seen quite an evolution in the last couple decades regarding television cameras in the courtrooms. And they have their detractors and they have their proponents. And the advocates, I guess, argue that it leads to openness and transparency and perhaps demystifies the process. But the critics, and I think I fall into that category, would argue that it occasionally turns lawyers and sometimes judges into media stars, and occasionally turns the process into a bit of a spectacle, maybe even a sideshow in the States when there's cameras. So I have two questions for each of you, and perhaps we'll start with Madam Justice. You've both been trial and appellate court justices where there are no TV cameras. You will presumably and possibly be becoming justices where they do have cameras in the Supreme Court of Canada. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on becoming a TV judge? And secondly, and what are your thoughts more generally on, there has been some consideration of allowing cameras into the trial courts. And you have both been trial court judges, and I'd be interested in hearing your comments on that. So we'll start with you, Madam Justice.
You know, this is a subject that I haven't given a great deal of thought to. I must say that I would have absolutely no difficulty with having cameras in the Supreme Court of Canada. It makes a lot of sense to me that the public have a chance to see how the court works and hear the arguments of counsel. And I think the issue is much more difficult when it comes to trial courts. When I was chair of the Liquor License Board, we had actually, at that time, decided we'd let the cameras in, actually much like it happened today, at the beginning of the hearing. But once a witness started to testify, the cameras were no longer rolling. As a trial court judge, I know there are policies. I've forgotten precisely what they are, but certainly no cameras during the hearings themselves. You know, like so many things, there are arguments that to be considered in favor of more openness, more transparency, opening it up to even greater audiences, allowing Canadians to see how trials work. I think that would be a very positive thing. On the other side, you have to worry about whether there's a potential for any negative impact on the way the trials themselves proceed. And I'm thinking particularly of, how witnesses may feel about being televised. And of course, there's also some issues that in certain kinds of cases there would be some privacy implications as well. So it's a great question. I can't give you a great answer. I haven't thought about it enough.
You're going to reserve judgment.
I'm going to reserve judgment. Thank you.
Mr. Justice Moldover?
Well, thank you. It is a great question, and I have no difficulty whatsoever with cameras in the appellate courts if that is what people want. It's a very different forum than the trial court, as we all know. The only experience that I've ever had with cameras in the courtroom at the appellate level was the Stephen Truscott reference. And you know, for about a minute and a half, we noticed them and so on. And then, of course, once you're into the argument and the debate, I mean, it's as if they're not even there. And I can say without hesitation that I don't think it impacted whatsoever on the way I or any of my colleagues conducted ourselves. As I say, it was as if they weren't there. Now, having said that, if you decide to put cameras in the appellate courts, I'm not sure how broad the audience would be, but that's a different matter. Trial courts, in my view, are a very different thing. The stresses and pressures, and it can be a very nerve-wracking experience for witnesses. It can be a dreadful experience for complainants, for example, in sexual assault trials and so on. And talking about the most private things in their life, that's one that, in my view, would have to be very much studied. I would never want to see our trials turn into what we regrettably saw some years ago in the United States in a particular case. And we cannot, in my respectful view, ever allow something like that to happen. So I would go very carefully in terms of the trial courts. But as far as the appellate courts go, I have no concerns.
How much time do I have? I'll defer.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Boivin?